So it's 10:45. What can I offer you today? Now, I started researching this subject with a different mind in regards to what the area is about. Now, when I started looking at the Benin bronzes, I was getting very confused with one simple issue. The Benin bronzes actually come from Nigeria, from Benin City. Now, that caused me a problem on Tuesday. And the problem was that I was looking at the Benin bronzes and it was saying Nigeria every time. And I just thought, I don't really understand this. And that's a good place to start, because what we're going to do is refer to these bronzes as the Nigerian bronzes from Benin City. So that sets the scene. So what I need to do is show you where precisely in Nigeria these Benin bronzes actually come from. And then I've got an article in front of me that might help us understand a little bit more. And then I've got two books in front of me. And these two books will help us understand why sometimes major archaeological finds are out there and we know about them, and other times why when we look for major archaeological discoveries out there, we don't find any information on them. So that's going to be explained here. So before I look at this little article in front of me, let's look at these wonderful images. Now, I first started examining these bronzes when I was in Leicester University. So maybe the first time I come across this was around 1999, 2000, so that's 20 years ago. And if you asked me which country the Benin bronzes came from, even up until the beginning of the week, I'd have said the country of Benin, because obviously I wasn't reading the text properly. So when obviously I found out that the Benin bronzes are actually from Benin City in Nigeria, things were made a little bit more easier. The biggest issue with these bronzes today is the same issue that we look at and we think about when we start examining the Elgin marbles. Now, there are two sort of sets of bronzes. Bronzes that have been legitimately traded out of the country, and bronzes that were taken by the British Army as war reparations in 1897. So when we look at this article, it talks about those Benin bronzes that were stolen, the British government legitimized it to say, you know, this part of war reparations, but they were basically stolen in 1897. Those are the ones that the country of Nigeria want back. And then it opens another problem, and another discussion area. And that discussion area is, what right do these countries have to the return of their own cultural treasure? Now, hopefully we can have a little bit of a debate about that. It worked really well when we did this on Tuesday. And the Elgin marbles were taken out of Greece. Some say with the permission of the Turkish authorities, but Greece was under military occupation by another power. So whether that power gave permission for Elgin to have them or not, it was an illegal act. And when we look at, for example, the return of Aboriginal artifacts to somewhere like Tasmania that were again taken without the people's permission, those artifacts should be returned. In regards to other countries like Egypt, where we've seen turmoil due to the Arab Spring, so I think that was the 2012, wasn't it, or thereabout. Some archaeologists in the West argue that Egypt shouldn't have its treasures returned, because if it keeps on having wars, then these things are going to be looted and they're safer in the West. And then you've got to think, what right have we got to argue that they are safer with us than they are safer in Egypt? Because as we've just recently seen, in the past 10 days, we've seen America and people breaking into the Capitol in Washington, D.C., and they're breaking into the Capitol and some things go missing. And you're thinking that's a Western country. So even in the West, our artifacts are not safe. So there's that debate of whether things should be returned back or not. I'll tell you my sort of thoughts on this, that when back in 2003, when I was meant to be working in the Baghdad Museum, and then there was the illegal invasion of Afghanistan, and we start to see the active looting of museums by British and American soldiers in, did I say Afghanistan? I meant Iraq. So actually, we went into Afghanistan then as well. But when we look at Iraq and we look at British and American soldiers looting artifacts from museums, you know, up until that point, I actually believed that these artifacts in our museums, up until 2003, I believe that those artifacts should go back. After seeing that, I started to believe that these artifacts in the British Museum weren't safe by being returned. But what right have I got to think that? The other thing as well is, when we saw ISIS a few years ago, lots of those wonderful monuments were destroyed. Now, if we'd have returned the contents of the Smithsonian, Pergamon Museum in Germany, the British Museum, if we'd have returned those artifacts back to Syria and Iraq, those artifacts would have been destroyed. So, but then again, what right have we got to say whether people could destroy their cultural evidence or not? So that's very important. So I've mentioned that. So I got that out of the way. So there's lots of these portable artifacts, as well as these artifacts stolen in 1897 from Nigeria. And this wonderful, beautiful bronze, which is 40 centimeters in height. So it's a nice dutty leopard. It's quite lifelike. Its proportions are great, and many of these were actually produced. Now the date for this, the maximum date for this, is 1680. And this is actually in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. And this is probably a trade object. So because it's a trade object, that's probably got a right to stay in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, because it was legitimately traded out of Benin. Because at this stage, now I use the word Benin, right, that's really interesting, I need to explain that. The Benin Empire based in Nigeria. So this empire was a great empire, and it had sway over the land from 1440 all the way into the 1800s. Some say up until about 1897, when the British got there and they sort of destroyed the last bits of the Benin world. There were these great trading links. This country was a very powerful African country, very powerful African country. And when there was the scramble for Africa in 1878 by Britain, even Germany, France, even Italy, those countries, and Spain and a little bit of Portugal, even though they've been there for a little bit of a while. So those countries were claiming that they had a right to Africa, because there were no civilized countries in Africa. Benin was a civilized country. Ethiopia was a civilized country. And even Ethiopia stopped the Italians from invading and defeated the Italians at the Battle of Adowa before the end of the 1800s. But Benin wasn't so lucky. So there's lots of problems when we look at artifacts, and there's lots of problems that we can sort of try and get around. So to try and sort of get a measure of where we are, immediately, this is why it's sometimes very good to try out a lecture on my friend Mike, right? Mike's a member like you guys, but he's a guy that's been coming over, and he's a guy that I test out the lectures on every week, right? So he sits over there, and I said, right, the Benin bronzes from Benin on the map there. That's what I said. And then we started to work out that no, it's actually just in this area, Benin City in Nigeria, where these Benin bronzes come from. And the heart of the Benin Empire was basically in Nigeria, but sort of stretched a little over towards the modern country of Benin. So that's a mistake that I made, and I quickly rectified it. So what we're sort of going over there, Benin there, we sort of go a little bit further over and we look at the map, and then we go Benin City. So this is when we think about the Benin bronzes, Benin City. I know it sounds very confusing, but we had to get that out there. So if anyone's looking for these bronzes, use the word Nigerian bronzes. And there's actually a whole text that I read that doesn't mention Benin once. It mentions these Nigerian bronzes, but out there, they're known as the Benin bronzes. So that's where it gets very confusing. Now, Benin City itself was the beating, pulsating heart of a great empire. So well, one reason why it became great was because of Portugal. It wasn't because of Portugal. Portugal didn't found a city here. Portugal was the great trading partner with Benin, right? And Portugal gained from Benin, the Benin Empire, and vice versa. And it was a great trading relationship. Portugal didn't make any attempts to conquer this empire. So, you know, everything went well. Everything went well into the 1600s. Everything went well into 1700s, 1800s. Everything was okay. Natural trade. It was great. But then we got the scramble for Africa and everything went wrong. The Western powers said that they deserved to have Africa, which is completely wrong. They even ended up with Egypt after all as well, after the First World War. So this is one of those things. And when we've got to mention slavery at this point. When we look at slavery and North America, and I'm going to be very careful what I say, and I know this is being recorded, but I've got to say that there was a legitimate trade in slavery, right? Slavery is wrong. Slavery is abhorrent. I don't agree with any human lives being taken into slavery at all. It's wrong. But when I say it's legitimate, the Empire of Benin were actually trading their sort of people and sort of people around with the Portuguese, and that's the slave trade, right? It doesn't make things right, but that gives you a little bit of a background. So I just needed to say that in there, and you just needed to put that in context. Eventually, the slave trade turns into something else. People are naturally being stolen from Africa. People are naturally being stolen from Ireland. People are naturally being stolen from Australia, and they're being forcibly placed into slavery. That's when slavery takes another ilk. And that's when the British get involved in slavery, and so on and so on. So there's two areas of this sort of jumbled up slave trade, right? Slavery is something that I've never approved of, but I'm trying to put it into context. And when we think about Benin, we think about the art that's coming out. This is an ivory mask. So we're not talking about bronzes, we're talking about brass work and copper work, we're talking about woodwork, and we're talking about wonderful ivory masks like this. So on that point, I think what I need to do is move over. We've got this, we've got these kingdoms of Benin, and we've got this portrayal. Now, this is a rather interesting portrayal. It's sort of, it adds in and adds away from several different evils. It brings in the Portuguese here. It brings in the portrayal of a leader. Now, this leader itself, leaders would have had these bands around their neck. Copper, golden bands, brass bands around their neck. This is a sign of office. So you've got the Portuguese, you've got these great figures from the Benin Empire. And I think the artist has done something really interesting here. That guy has got a rifle, and he's not on the Portuguese side. And you've got these leopards in the background. So if we sort of move on a little bit back to this, and we've got this little bit of a map. So where the Dahomey Kingdom is over here, that itself is where modern day Benin is, and the Ivory, and there you've got Benin City, the Kingdom of Benin, which would have eventually stretched out, come back in, stretched out, come back in. And it's rather interesting to think about this. It's rather interesting to think about in the 1500s that you've got these empires. You've got the Mali Empire up there on the left. On another map, you see the Great Kingdom of Zimbabwe. And obviously you've got the Great Kingdom of Ethiopia further up north as well. So Africa is not what's portrayed in those films from 1937 with Tarzan and the apes. I used to absolutely love those films. But one thing I learned about those films, which was completely wrong, was that people in Africa had cauldrons, and if you were a white guy, you'd be placed into that cauldron and stewed alive. And Tarzan would occasionally save the really attractive woman and stop her head being shrunk. So that was basically what I knew about Africa. All of that completely wrong. Some of that might be right, but I think the portrayal of this world is very wrong, because I think what people legitimize to make the slave trade legitimate later on. People wanting to say that, you know, we've got a right to Africa when there's all these kingdoms there, you know, that's all wrong. So when I went to school, for example, I can remember sitting in my history classes in school and the history teacher talking about the scramble for Africa, ignorant savages and backwards people, and all these words that we used, all these sort of racist terms that were used, which were in the textbooks. This isn't my history teacher. This was in the textbooks. So in other words, as an influential teenager, all I was learning was that we had a right to our bit of Africa. We had a right to Cecil Rhodes. There were no empires in Africa. But in my history class, my teacher actually slipped up, because he would talk about Cecil Rhodes, Great Zimbabwe, and gold. And I'm thinking, oh, and King Solomon's Mines and the Queen of Sheba. Hang on, King Solomon's Mines and the Queen of Sheba, weren't they those two figures that we used to come across in Tarzan and the Apes? Because they were always mentioned. Explorers were going out looking for King Solomon's mines and the great graveyard of the elephants and all the rest of it. And actually, there's a little bit of truth in some of that. But only if I knew a little bit more, maybe I could have seen Africa for what it was when I did my degree. And today, it wouldn't make things as awkward at times as it's coming across today. So what I would like to do is I'm going to do what I occasionally do with Mike. I say, we got this subject, what can we find in the books? Right, so I got lots of books here, as you know, but two that I usually refer to. I usually refer to Archaeology by Colin Renfrew and Paul Barn. And there's another book here, which is a story of archaeology. And a story of archaeology, the 100 greatest archaeological finds or discoveries or things in archaeology in the world. So the first book I looked to was Archaeology, and I looked up Nigeria, and there was nothing about Nigeria. Actually, there's no mention of Nigeria in this book. No mention at all. So this is supposed to be the standard university textbook. This is what I was given in Leicester University, right? So I thought, right, if it's not in Nigeria, let's look at Benin. Let's sort of let's go down here and look at Benin. Where Benin. Oh, it's not even in here. The Benin bronzes are not even in this book. And I thought, right, okay, right. So the other author, Paul Barn, on here, I thought, right, the editor of this book, surely he's going to have missed it out. But no. So I looked in the index, right? So I looked in the index of here and I thought, right, is it going to be under Nigeria? No, it's not going to be under Nigeria. So is it going to be under Benin? Yes, it is. So you go to page 44. So you flip to page 44 and you think, right, nice, 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 nice. Let's get to these pages. Oh, brilliant. The Benin bronzes. And strangely enough, the headlines are Nigerian art. So then you get to that point and you get really confused, because actually through these pages, I don't really think Benin is mentioned more than a couple of times. So in other words, if you, so it's in the index is Benin, Ivory, and so on. But when you look at the text, it's about Nigeria. And one wonderful thing it actually tells you, it opens your mind out again. It sort of, it pushes you into a different direction. So where it pushes you into the fact that Benin is a lot more than just its bronzes, right? And the other thing as well is, when we think about the bronzes, most of them are actually brass, right? So even the name of the Benin bronzes is actually wrong. They should actually be the Benin brasses or the Benin ivories as well. So even that gets confusing. So I've just got a few little bits on the little text that we have. One says, I will say that my history teacher in early high school taught us about the slave trade, and that is one thing I will say was progressive in my early education. That was good. And here we go. I have heard of Elmina Castle. Are we looking at Ghana, West Africa? We're not looking at Ghana, West Africa, but that's really relevant, Pam, because that's really relevant because you're mentioning another people. You're mentioning another bow to the string of these people of Africa. So that's why I've stayed away from ancient Egypt, because everyone's done ancient Egypt. Everyone knows about ancient Egypt. Well, you know, there's a lot we can learn. There's a lot I can do in a lecture about ancient Egypt, which is all new. But what I'm trying to say is Africa's a lot more. This is why we did Great Zimbabwe a few weeks ago, right? This is why we're doing this now. So if we want to think about Benin, and we want to think about this landscape, the Asante, for example, and the Ife people, or the Yoruba kingdom, we actually think that this isn't about just this one period in time. This isn't about 1200, suddenly you've got a civilization and you've got the Portuguese and then everything goes wrong and you've got the scramble for Africa, 1897, and that's it. Not all about that. So what we do find, and actually one thing I will say, in Africa, we got on the eastern coast of Africa, we've got iron working, we've got iron kilns, iron furnaces around 300 years BC. So they're working iron. Yes, they're working iron on the east coast of Africa just a few years after that, when we're working it. So that's an interesting thing. So we think about this, and if I look here, the headlines directly are Nigerian art, a Fabergé-like vitriosity. Very odd title there. So it talks about in the late 1800s, the museums and art markets of the world were flooded with a vast quantity of extraordinary bronze castings and ivory carvings that had been seized by the Royal Navy as repatriations during the Benin punitive expedition of 1897. The subsequent plundering of Nigeria's remarkable art heritage resulted in there being little, if any, documentation on the exact sources and context of most pieces. Actually, most of these pieces, in regards to the great palace that these were actually taken from, just south of Benin City, and I'll actually show you some of these now. This is what's being stolen. Like, this is what they're talking about. This is what's being stolen. This. And there's 6,000 of these. These are the Elgin marbles of Nigeria. Now, many of these date from the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, and 1800s. And what they describe, what they tell us, is the history of the kingdom of the Benin Empire. When this was all ripped out, it wrenched the history. It wrenched the guts out of the individual, not knowing where the guts go back in, and it goes into all the different museums. But there's a little bit of help there that I realized. Today, we've got metallurgical experts. And those metallurgical experts and some dating techniques will be able to date the precise dates due to magnetism and the casting when these were actually created. And then if one was created in 1605, the one alongside it was created in 1620. So you can now put the chronology in there, right? You could probably work out the sources of the copper and the sources of the zinc or tin, depending on whether it's brass or bronze. The thing is, what the British government argue, and I don't know if they still argue this because I haven't actually gone into the texts about this for about 19 years, but what the British government was arguing is that we've got a right to these. We've got a right to them. Now, these are in the British Museum. We've got 950 in the British Museum, and there's another 5,000 somewhere else on the planet. We've got a right to these. And the reason why we've got a right to these, I can get my words out properly. The reason why we've got a right is that when we invaded Nigeria in 1897, and the invasion was caused by the Empire of Benin, supposedly, we had a right to this, our reparations for our invasion. In other words, you caused the invasion, therefore we deserve these as reparations for you causing the invasion and us raping and pillaging your city, us setting fire to your palaces. You caused this, therefore we've got a right to these. That used to be the argument given by the British Museum. And now the argument given by the British Museum is that Nigeria isn't a safe place for these to go back to. However, the Nigerian government is still building this brand new museum to house these. They're building a new museum with all the security and all the rest of it. And one thing the Nigerian government can now say is, well, we can keep this building safe. And when the Smithsonian say, well, you know, we're not giving these back because it's not safe in Nigeria, the Nigerians can simply say, well, look what happened to the Capitol building. The United States isn't safe either. So what right have you got to say that you're not going to return these back? I believe in my heart and my mind, myself, personally, that these should be returned to Nigeria. We've got no right to keep these anymore. These were stolen in 1897. They did crap to reparations, right? Rubbish to the fact that Nigeria isn't safe. Nigeria is now a safer country, right? It's a growing, up and coming, very wealthy country. And it's going to be one of the great countries in Africa as it's becoming now today. So they got a right to these. So, and we haven't got a right to say that you don't have a right to your cultural heritage. Some of the things that have been legitimately traded out of the country, no, they don't need to go back because the Benin Empire traded them out. They had to stay out. That's fine, right? They don't go back. Because if you go down this slippery slope of all countries having their artifacts returned, let's have a little look at this one, right? Now, some of the early excavations, there was a site in Nigeria called Ugbo Ukwi, and at Ugbo Ukwi, they undertook an archaeological excavation on a grave of an important individual. It was two-tiered. On the top, in this sort of a two-tiered grave, it was all made of wood, and it was a roofed wooden chamber, and there was ivory tusks. In the top bit were 5 attendants. In the lower bit, there was this great leader of the great Benin world, this great Benin Empire. This leader was buried with a bronze staff and a wooden chest with copper chest ornaments and a crown. So that's how we knew he was a leader, a great king. And buried with 1,000 glass carnelian beads that likely came from India, right? There's a point to this. If those items before 1897 legitimately traded out of Nigeria ended up in India, right? And the Nigerians say, actually, give us our history back, right? Then the Indians can then claim, right, give us the goods back that you found in this burial chamber. Do you see the point I'm trying to make? there comes a point that you've got to say no, right? If things have been legitimately traded, then it's no. If they've been stolen, like the Elgin marbles, like these wonderful treasures from Benin City in 1897, then they are to be returned. Those are the great differences. God, there's my political head. There's my political head. So just a little bit of information. What we do have is dating to around the 300s, 400 years BC. If I can show you this, because I didn't scan these in, these beautiful terracotta heads. Now, if you're looking at this wonderful terracotta head, you can see the shape of the eyes, the triangular eyes. Now, this is part of the Nok culture of Nigeria, the Nok culture. And this dates back to about 300 years BC. So they're making these wonderful heads. Yeah. So they've got a ceramic, sort of semi-ceramic industry, right? So a terracotta head fired. A fired terracotta head, and they say it's still sort of semi-porous, so it probably wasn't at a massively high temperature. These heads associated with the Nok culture in West Africa, that's what we're talking about, in 1928, sort of nailed the fact that this Benin Empire is part of a developing world in Africa that's been going on for quite some time. These people were producing pottery, nice terracotta representations of pottery, and this is back 2,300 years ago, right? And if you want to argue, what were we doing in Britain at that time? We weren't producing anything like that, right? So, you know, they were more advanced in West Africa, and maybe in East Africa as well, with their kilns, with their iron kilns, with their iron furnaces. They were probably quite advanced then as well. So obviously what we're talking about is very much with this earlier art, they're sort of displaying their features. It's said, for example, that these features, the triangular eyes, the sort of if you look, I'm going to read directly what it says. I don't like using this word, but in the early pottery is clearly describing negroid features. And in lots of these representations, okay, in lots of representations of the people of West Africa, right, it's referring to, they're actually showing some misphysical features and deformities as well. So they're basically putting all sort of features in their pottery and their portrayals. So by the time you get to away from the Nok culture of Nigeria, and you move on from that and you go into about the 900 years AD, which is 1,000 odd years on, then people are actually very much into portraying heads in bronze. So we've got a wonderful head there in bronze, that wonderful head there, and we've already seen this ivory mask here. So it's a really, really nice portrayal there. And that head itself, head made but using the lost wax process of bronze casting. So bronze casting into the 1200s. And that individual there with the crown, right, represents, if you're, we're not looking at the map. So so if we get some chronology as I'm going to be reading through it. So what we're finding is that the technology to create these bronze castings in the 1200s came from that kingdom there, the Ife kingdom, or known as the Yoruba kingdom, the kingdom of Ife. And basically their skills of casting moved into this area of the Benin kingdom, around Benin City, which is in modern day Nigeria. So that wonderful, this itself, amazingly enough, again, show you that itself dates to the 1200s. That's 800 years old. That's a wonderful piece of art. So if people want to describe these people and be really racist and describe about fuzzy wuzzies and people boiling people in cauldrons and all the rest of it, they can be happily, mistakenly told to be wrong. Because when they're making these wonderful bronze castings, if you want to compare this with Europe, we're a little bit backwards, actually. Things are not going our way in Europe. Where things are going their way in regards to West and East Africa, because not long after this, we're talking about the eruption of the kingdom of Mapungubwe and Great Zimbabwe and all the rest of it. And we're talking about the great riches that we see in regards to the great kingdom of Ethiopia. So now we've said all that, and if there are any words that people have been a bit sort of taken aback by today, I'm just using the text that I've got in front of me. Thank you. So what I am going to do now is I got two nice little bits of text, right? So we're going to keep this on there, not the artifacts, and I'm going to try and bring up these texts. So, oh yeah, we haven't actually done the one that I wanted to show you, right? So what we need to do, I'm going to just see where we are. Not that. I'm just going to bingo. I did in the wrong place, my friends. So let's sort of share this before somebody jumps out of the screen and saying we're not seeing anything. So, right, so here we go. Stop screen. Let's go to here. Bingo. So what we should be showing, wonderful Chrissy babes, is the headlines: Nigeria's opportunity for the return of the Benin bronzes. Now, when I read this week, this dates to the 11th of September 2020. Right, so you've got that there. You've got that figurine. Now it's basically saying what was taken in 1897 and what wasn't taken in 1897. That's really important. That's that debate. So you know where I come on. If it was traded out of there before 1897, then it's legitimate. It stays in the museums. If it was taken in 1897, then it's to be given back to the Nigerians. So this debate itself. So I'm not a fan of Black Lives Matter, right? From a North American context. But when we actually come back to this here, a debate which has been heating up for years has reached boiling point. I don't think that's a good use of words, actually. Many in Africa and elsewhere say the time has come for the return of cultural treasures looted during colonialism. Big tick, I agree. The Benin bronzes, thousands, 6,000 of them, brass, bronze, ivory sculptures and carvings have become highly charged symbols of injustice. And they are originally from what is now Edo State in southern Nigeria. So in other words, Benin City, the old empire of Benin. So there we go. We've got a little bit more information coming up about this. Stolen by British soldiers and sailors in 1897. Most are in Western museums and private collections. The British Museum, which has some 950 Benin bronzes, has come under a particular criticism for its refusal to give them back, but is only one of many museums struggling to justify the legitimacy of its collection. Right, stop a minute, stop, right? There's so many problems when we look at this. There are so many problems, and it's twofold. When we think about the Brahmin statues being blown up in Afghanistan in 2003, the Taliban said, look, this is our country. We can do whatever we like with our history and archaeology. You know, we've got a right to blow these things up, right? So that's, you know, even though that looks very wrong, you know, they say, you know, we've got a right to destroy these things. So a counter argument to that is to actually make copies of all these things before we send them back. So if they decide to destroy them, then at least we've got copies, right? So the other thing about all this is lots of these countries that are asking for the return of these treasures didn't exist when these countries created these treasures. Now, it could be said that Nigeria is the direct development of the Benin Empire. That's fine. That's okay. But then we've got arguments along the lines of Macedonia. Right, this is an interesting one. when Andronicus in 1956 started looking into the great treasures at, in the Macedonia that's in northern Greece, right? He didn't know then that in years' time, at Vergina, where he was discovering these treasures associated with Alexander the Great, Alexander the Great's mother, associated with Alexander the Great's father, Philip II, he didn't know that a few years later in 1991, Yugoslavia would break up into two, right? So the Yugoslavians have now got Croatia, Serbia, Montenegro, and there's Macedonia. So the Macedonians have used the symbol that was found on the chest by Andronicus, associated with Philip II in northern Greece, which is Macedonian Greece, and they've used it on their flag. And the Macedonians have actually, the country of Macedonia, are actually arguing, actually, those treasures are ours. And the Greeks are saying, no, they're actually ours. And so there's that great problem. So which country do you return these artifacts to? Who do these artifacts belong to, right? So you've got all those different arguments, right? Because of name changes. Now, what we've got to look at is if a people and that country want a sense of identity, then the answer is that they maybe need to be given those artifacts back. Even though the original people of that country are now dead and gone, they still want that identity. Maybe that's an answer. But one thing I will say is it did actually bring me to some realization. I haven't got the image, but if some of you can remember it. When we did the lecture on Great Zimbabwe, we saw an image of a gentleman from Zimbabwe, right? And you could see him looking through the glass at the golden rhinoceros from Mapungubwe, right? Mapungubwe is in South Africa, but this gentleman from Zimbabwe is looking into this cabinet and saying, that's my history. And it is his history. And you could see it in his eyes. You could see the way his eyes were lit up, and you could see him looking into that cabinet. And if that's an image that we see in regards to people having their own history in front of them, then that's worth sending all this stuff back. But there is another problem. The one reason why the British Museum was established, and the Smithsonian and the Bibliothèque Nationale and the museums in Germany and Austria and Italy, some of the reasons why they were established is with the idea that people from all the way around the world can feel, right, start this again. For example, when you go to the British Museum, most people are never going to get to Nigeria. Most people are never going to get to Australia. So if you have representations of that history from Nigeria, from Brazil in the British Museum, it gives people an opportunity in Britain to see treasures from other worlds. Now, if you send all those treasures back, those people will never ever get those opportunities to see those artifacts. So we've got to then convince those countries that those artifacts come from, that we are looking after those artifacts, and they've got another meaning other than just things stolen from these countries in the first place. So I didn't think this was going to be as deep today, but it is rather deep. So when we look at, it says here, the Edo kings, the kings of the Benin Empire, the Obas. Oba is Rex, means king. The Oba, that's what that means. Campaigned for decades in vain for the Benin bronzes to be returned. But few in the West took seriously African demands for restitution. Western curators argued that Africa lacked the resources to look after its treasures. They got no right to say that. But also that Western museums had no moral obligation to repair any damage inflicted during decades of colonialism. I disagree with that. these attitudes are changing and things are moving on. So you're looking at that wonderful figure, intricately carved plaque that once decorated the walls of the Benin Kingdom's royal palace, Benin City. Since 2017, the Benin Dialogue Group, which brings together the current Obas and the Edo state governors of Nigeria, government and museums in Germany, the Netherlands, Sweden and the UK, has been working on a compromise plan for some Benin bronzes to be returned to Nigeria. Now, Benin City in Nigeria and the Edo state will host a new royal museum. European museums will take turns to lend a few hundred Benin bronzes. I know that's not going to work. The effect says the Oba's Palace will be a permanent collection in rotation in Benin City. At long last, the Edo people will be reunified with a significant part of their cultural patrimony. But there's a problem with that, right? You either give these things back because these countries are not going to be happy giving their artifacts back. So there you go. You're talking about a living building to the Black Museum American experience. They're talking about both sides back the museum and all these wonderful things, and it sort of goes down with some of the other Benin bronzes that you can see in front of us there. But it talks about the ancient trade of Benin bronzes. So that's what I've been saying. So that ancient trade in Benin bronzes, I don't feel that stuff should go back. But what should go back is the stuff taken in 1897. So this is very important. There's lots more about this that you can read. But what we're now going to do is answer a question before it's asked. So, and the question is, before it's asked, is for me to change the screen, new share, going back to this, just sort of show you a couple more images and go back to this plan. So what we can basically see is all these different states. You mentioned Ghana earlier on, Pam, there's Ghana, and you're talking about kingdom in Ghana from about 400 to 1200, Mali, the great empire of Mali, 1250 to 1400, Songhai from 1450 to 1600. And then you look at Benin, that's around from about 1440 to 1600. Some say as late as 1690s. That again, 1440 to about 1800. Some say that that's to 1897. And you've got all these other little names, the Asante Kingdom, all the rest of it, right? Back to this image. And again, look at all these little bits, little states that used to exist. There's a meaning for this image as well. So what you can say, whoever put this together obviously knows their African states, right? 1625. Now, if you look at that little map, you can see Dutch outpost in KARL Kingdom, which is just before that 1625 there, the KARL Kingdom. Down south is a Portuguese trading colony. There's another trading colony. Down in these Akan states, there's these sort of other trading colonies. And the one thing to be said about that, they're trading colonies. They're not countries. They're not sort of taking over, right? So they're just trading. That's how Macau worked. That's how Hong Kong worked, and Hong Kong worked very well until we had to give it back. So those are the sort of trading colonies, and then the rest of the country is there. Britain made no attempt to conquer China. It was a trading colony at Hong Kong, quite a small trading colony actually, and the one at Macau as well, for the Portuguese, that was actually quite small as well. So we're talking about identity. These people have got identity before the scramble of Africa. In 1625, they got identity. In 1400, they got identity. These are people. They've got a history, right? They've got a history. So we've got no right to deny their history. I'm very much into this. So we look at this, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to read a nice little bit of text that I've got in front of me. And it goes as follows. Now, excavations and fieldwork in and around Benin City in the years 1961 to 1964 have established the outlines of an archaeological sequence and outlines of history in Nigeria. So the sequence is based on radiocarbon dates for the deposits that have been stratified in layers, statistical examination of pottery form and decoration, and on datable European imports. So what they're talking about, this is, you know, they're looking at these European imports. Now, what we've got is external imports back into the 1200s. Now, they're trading with Portugal and Spain, and probably Italy and other sort of European states into the 1200s and before. The stuff going on, we've got that. It's great. So even before the Portuguese start trading, after the 1440s or thereabout, there's this great trade with Europe, which is great, nice, healthy trade. Although the survival of locally found ground stone axes in Benin ritual indicates for the artistic use of copper and its alloys since the Bronze Age. So we've got working in bronze, copper, going all the way back to the Bronze Age, probably around 3,000 years ago. There is evidence. So what we do see is that there's this great advance by the 1200s in the use of copper and alloys. There's artistic guilds, there's art guilds across the Benin world and across all those other states that we've been seeing, what you can see in front of you now. Smithed and chased tin bronzes were found in context from the 1200s. Cast leaded brass was found in 1800 contexts. And this always goes back to about the 1600s as well. But what is very interesting here is that the person who wrote this text suggests that future archaeological work should make the origins and early development of the city a priority. So what we're talking about is that more should be made on study in Benin beyond the bronzes, really working out the context of these bronzes. And then this brings to the fire of the great Nigerian world, the great world of lots of these African countries, the great world of lots of countries around the world that are starting to see their foundations of their countries coming to life and coming to light, coming up into the air and giving another history. So this is what we're doing. We're giving a new history where we're changing what the history teachers told us to a new history. So reiterating what I've just said, the Kingdom of Benin perhaps is famous for its striking brass sculptures and bronze, ivory carvings, artistic plaques that portray the rulers of the kingdom and the families. The Benin Kingdom produced some of the finest artworks in Africa. And I've got to ask, did I just hear a cuckoo?
You did. Sorry, it's my phone.
Oh, my bloody God. According to ancient oral traditions, the roots of the people of Benin can be traced to the Kingdom of Ife's ancient traditions. So you've got Ife on there, right? Whoever's got their phones on, turn them off. Although located in modern-day Nigeria, Benin flourished thanks to its trading activities with neighboring kingdoms like Ife and all the other kingdoms then. And then you've got trade with Europe. And ancient Benin traditions also reveal that its people invited people from Ife to where they were at, where it's shown on the map there, okay, to sort of Benin City. And there's lots of trade going on. So basically, this sort of skill in their metalworking moved from the Kingdom of Ife over towards where Benin City is today on your map there, over towards the east. And if we think a little bit more as well, so we get back to this map as well, sort of what we've got the movement from Ife over to Benin. So we've got these two great trading cities over to there. And basically the skill of bronze working and brass working all the way goes down to Benin City, creating this great Benin Kingdom that spreads out all the way around. Let's just give you a little bit more information and then let's take a break. So the brief history, the Kingdom of Benin is one of the oldest and highly developed pre-colonial states in West Africa. That's a nice way of putting it. It sprang up in about the 900s, as I've already mentioned. And what we've got is small groups, small kingdoms that are eventually, by around the 1100s, by around the 1200s, think they're starting to go places. Now, creating this great kingdom. Around 1450, the Oba of Benin, the king of Benin, Benin City, in 1440, 1450, this marks the beginning of the Golden Age. And this Golden Age saw the building of great palaces. This Golden Age saw the building of a standard army, acquiring new territories. By the 1600s, this army has got rifles. So, you know, eat your heart out. It's really going places. So they're trading with the Portuguese. And with their trade with the Portuguese, they're becoming greater armies, greater states. They're creating their own empire, right? But by the 1860s, between internal conflicts, between changes with trade in the West, with greed with the West, things are changing. But up until the 1800s, there's these great artistic guilds. This is the world where brass and bronze comes to light. The Dutch describe these people as, and their places and their buildings, beautiful, and long square galleries as big as the exchange in Amsterdam, writes this Dutch geographer. He goes on to say, some bigger than others, resting on wooden pillars, covered from top to bottom with cast copper, on which deeds of war and battle scenes are carved. This is as the Dutch write. The Benin Empire, I think he's writing about this probably in about the 1600s. Many of the artworks were made of bronze, brass, ivory, or wood, displaying the Obas, the kings of the Benin Empire. So a little bit of background here. So in the 1890s, Benin was the place to be. It had palm oil. It had rubber. And with the Congo and with the Belgian kings in Congo, the British thought that they needed some of this palm oil and rubber. By 1897, a group of British envoys went to Benin. And by the time they arrived, some Benin soldiers murdered them, supposedly. In response to these killings, say we believe that's true, okay? Let's just believe that Benin soldiers murdered them. Well, it's their own bloody country for a start. So say that happened, right? In response to these killings, the British embarked on a punitive expedition to capture the city of Benin. Did they have the justification to then burn this palace that had stood from the 1440s? Did they have the justification to send into exile the king of the Benin world? Then they plundered and auctioned off thousands of cultural artifacts, 6,000 of them, to pay for the cost of the expedition. So again, it's back to what I said earlier on, right? Tell you what, right? You've caused us to invade your country. Now you've got to pay us for the cost of the expedition. It's the same as what happened in the First World War. We punished the Germans for starting the First World War. It wasn't Germany's fault. I always side with the Germans in the First World War. And then we forced them to pay war reparations. This is on another scale. There was no justification for the British to be there at all. And then they charged the Benin people for the destruction of their own city. It was their own fault. Therefore, we've got a right to these treasures. Over the years, there have been clamours by the Nigerian government. And can somebody remind me what colony, what country was Nigeria a colony of? Britain.
Oh, yeah.
Nigeria was eventually a British colony, right? Its main language is English, right? It's part of the Commonwealth. So why can't we give them this stuff back? It's absolutely ludicrous. it is ludicrous. This is a Nigeria was part of the British Empire, and is part of the Commonwealth. So as part of the Commonwealth, surely they deserve their treasures back. So what's going to happen now is this article in front of me was written in 2019, a year ago, right, basically. And the last thing at the end here, before we have a break now, it says about, it says after a century of looting the city and so on, the conditions for the return of the bronzes are now suitable conditions, because the new Benin Royal Museum will be open next year, and they do not want to go in the direction that the Greeks went into. They built a new museum to house the Elgin marbles, and they haven't had them back yet. It's absolutely ridiculous. You know, I've maybe sort of talked a bit too much in the past and said, well, you know, why should we give back the Elgin marbles to Greece? Because they've got financial problems, and there's talk of them selling off their history and their archaeology and all the rest of it. One, that's not happened, right? And secondly, I've got no right to say that the Greeks can't have their treasure back, because it was stolen from them by Elgin in the beginning of the 1800s. So give the Elgin marbles back to Greece. So we're going to take a break now. We've got a little bit more. I'm starting to waver a little bit. So let's just see if there's any questions. Let's sort of see where we are. So we won't be going on until the usual time of 1, because I'm not going to make it. So so what I'd like to do is ask Chris. Chris, babe, have you got any questions? And it's not you, Chris, the other one.
No, I haven't. Thank you, Karl.
Sexy Goth, anything you'd like to say, darling?
Oh, we've got a lot to answer for the Brits, haven't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I'm hoping you're going to show us some more artifacts from the civilization when you in the next bit of our session.
Yes, I am. There are a few images coming up. Thank you, darling. So Jane.
No questions. No, I agree with you on giving the artifacts back.
You don't have to agree with me, but I'm glad
I do, though.
Our agreement, Jane. I do. I'm glad I got your approval. Thanks.
But what would be nice would be if we could show that we were using the artifacts that we have for re-educating our population. Maybe the African authorities would be more inclined to let us keep some of them.
And you know what? You've just actually said something that I've never realized in all the years I've been doing this, right? Why don't we share some of our artifacts with Africa? Why do we actually let them see some of the Sutton Hoo treasures? If we're going to want to be high and mighty, right? Lots of Nigerians are not going to get to Britain, right? So why can't they see some of the Snettisham hoard that's been found? Why can't they see objects from our Romans past, right?
Mm. Absolutely, yeah.
That would be great. Why don't we just have this exchange? And just wouldn't it be great for a Nigerian to be looking at a Pictish carving, right? Whilst we're looking at one of their artifacts. That would be wonderful. Look at it that way. That sounds brilliant. Yeah, love it. Keith.
When I was traveling backwards and forwards to Nigeria, and I was coming back, the customs officials would often ask me, have I got any Benin bronzes in my luggage? So obviously there was a lot of smuggling going on at the time. So I used to say, no, I didn't have it because I was too full of Coke. But the north of Nigeria is very unstable at the moment because the south of Nigeria is Christian and the north is Muslims, and there's a lot of instability in the north. So, you know, it might be that we don't know what the future of Nigeria is going to be.
The other thing as well is I think religions need to start respecting what was there before, and that's the answer, because when we look at the Islamic State, they wasted so much time destroying their history and all the rest of it, instead of actually creating their state. right? It was the same could be said about the Germans in the Second World War. If the concentration camps had never happened and Germany would have actually concentrated on building its country up, then things would have been very different. And by erasing, like Pol Pot did, he tried to erase the entire history of Cambodia instead of focusing on the people that he was trying to help. And it's almost as if history defeats you when you destroy it. And if you embrace history, then you can learn from the past and go on. Chris, Mail.
Yeah, I share some of Keith's fears about Nigeria and looking after these items. I've got absolutely no objection to more going back. But I suspect in 50 or 60 years' time, you'd be hard pushed to find any of them.
Okay. That's a point of view, but there is the argument: what right have we got to what that right have we got to say what they can and can't do with their history? So I do see exactly what you're saying, Chris, and that old heart of me would agree with you. But we've got to hope that humanity changes. Ellen.
No, nothing, Carl. Thank you.
What about you, Pammy, baby Pam? I just muted her again. Sorry, Pam. Unmute you. Go on, babe.
When someone finds these treasures, they dig them up. The argument is, who do they belong to? What country do they belong to? And I think the person who's dug them up, as long as he's kept them, he or she, and looked after them, then it should stay in that particular country.
And that's what the British Museum is saying. That's exactly what the British Museum is saying. So, Jess, anything you would like to say briefly?
I personally, I understand everyone's concerns with it, but I personally feel like these people haven't had a chance to sort of preserve their history, to show it off. And I agree with this whole sharing of artifacts from different countries, because it allows more of a study from from anyone in the academic field who could make it, if you have someone from a different country looking at another country's history, they could sort of write a report and interpretations for people of their country to understand. Yes. And I feel like you come across a lot of issues like that. If you study anything from Spain, for example, sometimes all the sources are written in Spanish and it's hard to sort of find an interpretation that way. So maybe, it sort of brings knowledge to everyone else. Also knowledge of this world. We're all part of this world. And I think we should all know about everything, not just about ourselves, because our identity is important, but everyone's identity around us is, it influences our identity. So it's important to know everyone else's to know ours.
I completely agree with that. And it's just this idea that we haven't given these people a chance, and it's true. We've colonialism and decolonializing countries has been rushed. And for example, when we look at the likes of India, partition in India, where we saw the wholesale wiping out of thousands and thousands of Sikhs because they had no homeland, there was no real discussion about the history of these countries. And there should have been that discussion. And there should have been things put into place. And it was just to sort of, we're just going to decolonialize and we're just going to make things better overnight. It never happened, right? And it's these people should have had an opportunity, and they've not had an opportunity, and that opportunity now needs to be discussed. And if Karen and Jim don't want to say anything, we're going to have a break. 3.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. I want to get our 10 pennies worth in. Right, we disagree slightly, because we think if the British Museum's got 950 Benin statues, why not distribute them around museums around the world so that everybody can see them, not just people from their own country?
Do you know what? I don't feel I want to respond to that because God, that's something else I've not come across. Sharing artifacts was one that sort of led from Jane, right? But the idea of the British Museum then turning around and saying, actually, we've got Nigerian treasures, but we feel that these treasures should go to India and South Africa and Australia. God, that's another area altogether. Christ.
It should be Nigeria's, I think, Nigeria's choice on whether they would like to share with them. Ultimately, I think it should be down to the people whose culture it is. But it's a debate.
That's a debate. That was quite
rabbit holes.
I'm not often.
We had a very interesting discussion as to how far back restitution should go. You know, if you take it to its extreme, all the people of European descent should get out of North America because that's not their country. They've stolen it. Same for the Australians. So quite how far back do you go on this?
Well, this is one thing I've been getting angry about recently, that it's almost with America, for example. America is an extremely racist system. There's in the 46 presidents of the United States, there's never been a Native American president, right? Which I feel is extremely racist, right? And then when you look at your
say that about Britain, Karl.
When you look at your point there about I think your point was more about the artifacts. You know, at which point do we take this back? Do we actually start sending all the Roman artifacts that Rome brought over to us back to Rome? Do we actually send all the Samian ware back and all the rest of it? But what I've been saying from day one in this today, I've said, for example, that if it's been traded legitimately, then those artifacts should remain, right? If it's been stolen, then those artifacts should go back, but there has to be a point. For example, if we go back to the time of the Crusaders, we brought lots of stuff back from the Crusades, right? Well, I think there needs to become a point that we actually say, right, if it was in the 1700s when there was the empire building, the 1700s, maybe artifacts should see some restitution if they were stolen. But there has to come a cut-off point. There really does. And probably around the 1700s, and then we can discuss everything from the 1700s onwards.
Yeah, I agree. Right. And I feel like with trade as well, it's important if you found it there, it can sort of tell about trade links with the country. So, his identity of other countries as well.
And that influence over our country, exactly.
It's almost like saying Sutton Hoo should go back to, some of the artifacts should go back to Scandinavia because it's not British, but it tells you a lot of trade links of, with Britain. So. And
the point is, I don't think any Swedish have actually said they want the Sutton Hoo treasures back.
No.
I just think it's just that there has to be a cut-off point. And I think that intercourse between Sweden being over here and all the rest of it is really important. On that note, we're going to take a break.
One last thing.
Oh my bloody God, quick. You're going to have to be quick. I want a break.
If the country is proved to be unstable, if you send back the artifacts and they're destroyed, would it have been better to have kept the artifacts where they were?
But then again, it's the right of what I saw.
It's them defining who's unstable, really. You could, like you said, with capital.
I'm unstable. But yeah, you are right. Yeah, you are right, Jessica. The point is, right, is in 2003, right, Baghdad Museum was a safe museum, right, and in Iraq, which I completely agree with this. There was a report before 2003 of 20 guys looting Nineveh, right? They were all executed by Saddam Hussein, which I completely agree with, right? This archaeology was the identity of Iraq. Iraq worked hard for its identity. Their country had been ripped away from them, reconstituted by the West. It took them It took them 90 years, and you've got people looting the history and archaeology of Iraq. I agree with the fact that Saddam Hussein had those people executed for looting the history of his country, removing the identity of the people's identity of Iraq, right? So Iraq, from the sense of stability, had some of the most stable museums and curatorial sites in the world. And then we illegally invaded Iraq. We bombed its sites. We looted its museums, right? We caused that. And, you know, what is stability? If the West has caused the instability in these countries.
Not necessarily, because the pyramids and the tombs were looted prior to archaeologists getting there. And even even now in the markets, you can buy looted bits and pieces, can't you?
Well, I've actually got a collection of artifacts. I've got a collection of artifacts that were placed onto the open market in about 2013, 2014, that were being exported out of Egypt as being replicas, when in fact they were the real thing, right? Yes. So in other words, when somebody comes up to you in the street in Egypt and says, do you want an artifact? They are the real things now, right? And you are very right. There has to come a point where we have to stop and think. And this is not just about museums, this is about humanity. Humanity needs to start pulling its bloody finger out and start respecting other people, and then things can then move on. Right, on that note, very political. Goff is going to tell me off afterwards for being very political, but I'm going to have a drink. And do you know what? I love you, Goff. You're a very nice looking man, and you need a haircut.
Coffee break.
Oh God, I'm gonna put my sound off now. I don't want to hear Pam and back in. Oh, Pam looks so sexy like that. It almost looks like she's got no top on.
Go and have a drink.
Oh, thank you, Pam. I'll go and get a drink now. Thanks for your permission. That horrible Jim didn't let me have one. Thanks for that, Pam. I appreciate that. Cheers. I like this because it sort of said 45,500 years ago, a figurative artwork, painting, using red ochre pigment, showing a social interaction between a group of pigs. I like this, but then I started looking and thinking, I'm not precisely sure whether that is 45,000 years ago. It just didn't feel that way to me. It's showing a pig that measures 53 meters long, 53 inches long by 21 inches high. And that guy gives you a little bit of scale, right? I don't want to say any more about that, but I'm not happy with the date. So what I'm going to do is another one. Stone plaque reveals town's bribe to a Roman emperor. Now, what is this about? The perils of backing the wrong candidate for emperor in ancient Rome have been laid bare by a newly deciphered stone found in Bulgaria. A newly enciphered inscribed stone found in Bulgaria. Not that anyone's ever been to Bulgaria. The 10-foot inscription reveals the cold, real politic of the Roman Empire, with an emperor lying about his bloodline and demanding what was in effect a hefty bribe for one of his territories. The 2nd century stone slab, now restored and translated, was found in the ancient town of Nicopolis ad Istrum, once part of the Roman province of Thrace. It shows the town paid 700,000 silver coins, 700,000 silver denarii for my life story, as a way of ingratiating itself with Septimus Severus, who became an emperor after a struggle between 5 rival claimants following the assassination of the Emperor Commodus in AD 192. Archaeologists believe the town was forced to make the payment, as it had thrown its support behind one of Septimus Severus's rivals. So in other words, if you back the other side, you've got to pay a payment if your side loses, basically. So there's that one. So what else have we got? I've got to keep an eye on the ones I've used and the one I haven't used for next week. School trip, litter polluting archaeological record in future. I like this. Somebody mentioned about this last week, I think. Future archaeologists will have to dig through the plastic debris of past school trips. Experts have warned after decades of packed lunch litter was unearthed at an Iron Age site. Academics found masses of plastic when they were digging at Castell Henlys Hill Fort in Wales to study the roundhouses that were reconstructed in the 80s as an educational activity. They have warned that school trips in the plastic age will have to become more environmentally friendly. Or future researchers will unearth items such as Milky Bar wrappers and a Godzilla flask. The University of Liverpool team has issued the warning after surveying the impact of reconstructed houses built on the Iron Age site as an educational tool in the 80s. They found the site in Pembroke has been littered with 2,000 plastic items during its 35-year heyday as a school trip destination. Do you know what? I'm going to stop there, right? And the reason why I'm going to stop there is that article is technically wrong, because the whole point of examining roundhouses and the plastic that's been built up is to tell us of the interaction between the building and the children, right? So by finding plastic in my mind tells us of people who have visited there, these reconstructed buildings. It gives us a picture of interaction. And I don't think finding that plastic is wrong, because when they did a similar project in regards to the St. Fagans site, when they pulled down the roundhouses, they did a little bit of an excavation and they found similar things like plastic wrappers and stuff. So plastic spoons and straws and snack bar wrappers and cling film and even labels from apples were all very common finds. I think that is scientifically valuable. So that's controversial there. So stable stool turns out to be £15,000 Roman artifact. A large marble slab used as a step to mount horses for the last 20 years has been revealed as a rare Roman artifact worth £15,000 and 2 pence. The artifact was dug up from an old rockery in a garden in Wiltshire nearly 2 decades ago, but was caked in mud, meaning a carved laurel wreath and inscription were not visible. What are these people? Its owner then used the slab as a mounting block for many years before the mud washed it. I've got to be honest with you, right? It took 20 years for the mud to be washed away. This stable must have been absolutely humming. The inscription reads, "The people and the young men honor Demetrius of Metrodus, the son of Lucius." An archaeologist identified the 25-inch tall tablet as dating to the 2nd century and probably from Greece. I've got to be honest with you, right? They used this as a mounting block. They didn't wash it for 20 years. That stable must have been absolutely humping. Right, and one more, and we're just going to have one more after this. So this thing now, look at that. There it is, a new television series, right? Series film. The Forgotten Hero of Sutton Hoo. The new film, The Dig, attempts to return Basil Brown to his rightful place in history. It is August 1939. And the Third Reich, no, that's going another article. And it's 1939, and atop an ancient burial mound 10 miles from the Suffolk coast, an extraordinary chapter of British archaeological history is drawing to a close. 4 months after uncovering what newspapers have called Britain's own Valley of the Kings, Basil Brown, a former farm labourer, milkman and woodcutter, is preparing to leave Sutton Hoo. You can see all the stuff in the film. You can see that I was auditioned and, you know, and it's basically going on. And the scene from the Dig, a film about the world famous Sutton Hoo excavation that took place on the eve of the Second World War, has been imagined, and British dramatist Moria Buffin has brought it to life, but it is grounded very much in reality. So I'm really looking forward to this film with Ralph Fiennes, and guess who's writing a blockbuster book at this minute? Anyway, and you can't say me. And finally,
Karl, sorry,
yeah?
Before you leave that topic,
Oh,
I think Johnny Flynn is in that film.
you mentioned Johnny Flynn, yeah.
And,
Tell us about Johnny.
He's the one who sings that introductory song on The Detectorists.
You're joking. He's the same guy. I was watching that yesterday. He's
a lovely singer. Look him up on YouTube.
He's actually in it as well. I know. I was listening to it yesterday. You don't. Wow. Anyway, finally, that was a good interruption from Ellen. Oh God, I mentioned her name again. Book helped English talk. See, the only one you can see is you now, Ellen. Book helped English talk to Welsh peasants. A 108-year-old Welsh phrase book advertising English tourists how to address peasants has been unearthed by archivists. The 1838 volume of the Welsh Interpreter was written for those who wished to make themselves understood by the peasantry during their rambles through Wales. And this is in 1838. It allowed the increasing numbers of English people drawn to the magic of the scenery to command locals with phrases like, "Shave my beard and get me some plain snuff." Vital phrases for those scaling the rugged mountains are also present in the book, including, "Do not look down." The phrase book was found in Cardiff University's Special Collection and Archives, and experts believe it gives a flavour of historical, complicated Anglo-Welsh relations. And it says the impossibility of English tourists being understood by the mass of the Welsh peasantry. while some of the context can be seen as condescending, experts have said the phrase book shows a good-hearted effort to engage with the locals. Have you ever seen that Monty Python thing and they get a Hungarian guidebook? Yeah, that reminds me of that one. So what we're going to do now, I'm gonna crack on to the last bit, right? We've done that, so we're going to crack on. And I do believe that you are all muted, so I'm going to unmute some of you because I like a couple of you to be unmuted, including Keith and Goff and whatever. So that's fine. So we're going to crack on. So Goff wanted some more images, right, which he is going to get, right? So I'm going to do this straight away. I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, sharing the screen. Good. Well, we've already seen this image. So what we need to do, we need to work out where we are. Ife, Benin Kingdom. We've got these wonderful plans there and this wonderful portrayal. And as that's where we're talking about Oba. The name Oba is the name for the kings of Benin City, the Benin Empire, Nigeria. And look at that wonderful cockerel. A cast brass figure of a cockerel with punched feather decoration. The eyes are inlaid with coral. Absolutely beautiful. It's a shame I didn't get a clearer image of that. So to sort of give you a little bit of background knowledge, the Oba, as we know, is the name for King Rex for the Benin state. Some argue that this Benin Empire, otherwise known as the Edo Empire, which is now the name of the sort of county of that area now, they believe that lasted from 1440 to 1897. So it's an empire lasting 500 years. I got to be honest with you, tongue in cheek, it's a lot longer than a British Empire lasted for. So many of the images that we're going to see, many of the wonderful bronzes and brasses that we can actually see portray the leaders as much of the artwork of ancient Egypt does. Whether these are semi-ritualistic objects or whether they are in a way historical documents in the likes of brass and bronze and ivory and wood, could be up for debate. Now, one thing that I was going to mention earlier on, which just went straight out of my head, when I was actually studying this years ago, I can remember that when the Benin people, when the king of Benin in 1897 knew the British were coming, he basically said all our old documents, all our old library need to be buried somewhere, right? So they buried all the old documents. The library went up in flames, but the documents survived. And the amazing thing was the British didn't end up with them either. So that's a nice little bit of information in there. So one way when I started looking at this on Tuesday was that I just thought, do I focus purely on the debate, the politics? But I just want to give you a bit more. So let's just change the images over. So wonderful cockerel there. That probably dates maybe to about the 1700s. This is what we're talking about. These benign bronze plaques showing the king, the Oba in regalia, and with symbols of royal power dating from about the 1500s. So we've now got the metallurgical experts, and we've got the scientific dating to get some precise dates on these. And this is, if these are going to be handed back, then wouldn't it be great for them to be all reconstructed on a wonderful wooden panel and pillars, and you can actually read the kings and you can understand the Oba? That would be absolutely brilliant. That would be the end of the journey. Actually, you can't bring the palaces and all the other buildings back, but what you can do is bring back the story, and it's basically almost as if you're reading hieroglyphics but using science. The best way to do it. And also style as well. Stylistically, they're going to be a different style in the 1600s than they are in the 1800s. So there's different ways of trying to reconstruct this history and these wonderful bronzes. So to give you a little bit of information, bronze and brass. Brass is zinc and copper, and bronze is tin and copper. Both of these metals are in they're available, and you've obviously got iron as well with the trade of iron. That's the leader. He's got these rings around his neck. These are not those rings that you see of some African women that pushes the neck up, right? And you've got these big rings that pushes the neck up. These are that's a different meaning. These rings here are ruffs around the neck, and you can just see the mouth there. So they act differently. They're sort of signs of power, right? So we mentioned earlier on about trade goods. This is from the 1400s, right? Carved Benin ivory, armlet inlaid with brass. The object features depictions of Portuguese traders, emissaries, in the late 1400s. So that there is a wonderful piece of history. Now, that leads me to another point. And at the end, keep your questions brief. That leads me to another point. This is a world between the Portuguese and the Benin Empire. The Benin people are very proud of their links with the Portuguese. So the Portuguese are portrayed. The trade is part of the Portuguese trade and all the rest of it. So I believe that the other people that should be deciding the history of these bronzes is the Portuguese on the side of the Nigerians. The Portuguese should actually be saying, hang on a minute, this is part of Portuguese history. This is part of our relationship with the Nigerians. We believe as Portuguese that the Nigerians should have this history with them. This is part of our history as well. So it's not just the Nigerians who should be saying that they should have the return of these bronzes in 1897. It's the Portuguese, because it's those links. It's that great interchange that brought these people together and brought their history together. So hopefully you can see that sort of exchange and the importance that the Portuguese could put on this and backing the Nigerians for the return of these wonderful bronze plaques. But this is actually a trade item. This is an ivory trade item. So obviously this has been traded out before 1897. It's in a Western museum. It's not part of the items that I feel should be returned. It's part of the history of this world that once existed. So again, another beautiful leopard. They are really proud of their leopards. They love their leopards. And we've got lots of figurines from the 15, 16, 1700s, lots of these leopards. A really nice portrayal there. So what I've got is I've got two texts. And I'm probably just going to focus on the one in front of me, because the other text is, tragic story, slavery, and all the rest of it. We've done a bit of that. So if I'm going to concentrate on anything, I'm going to concentrate on this. The Benin bronzes, the Nigerian bronzes made of brass and bronze, are a group of sculptures which include elaborate decorated cast plaques. They're decorated, they're elaborate, they're wonderfully cast. Animals, humans, royal regalia, personal ornaments, commemorative heads, recording victories and battles and the history of the country going all the way back to 1440. And most of that stuff that was taken in 1897 was being created in the 1500s. All of this is being created by skilled specialist guilds associated with the Oba, the King Benin city of the Benin world. Great historical meaning, great historical significance, and placing the Nigerians back into history. And in many ways, by placing the Nigerians back into history, the Nigerians can be saying, hi, why do we need to turn to Europe anymore? We can turn to our own history, our own wealth, and our own ability. And that's exactly what the Nigerian politicians are saying. Why go anywhere else? Stay here. Help us build on this base of history in Nigeria. This is what Nigerian politicians are saying now. So they need this stuff back to give them their identity. This material stolen in 1897, given a historical social interaction, relationship between neighboring societies, all that's recorded in these wonderful plaques. So, go away. My phone, sorry about that. One element of the history of the Kingdom of Benin represents within the bronzes is the kingdom's early contacts with Europeans. Trade and diplomatic contacts with Benin and Portugal developed on the west coast from the 1400s, as we've already said. These early connections included Portuguese and Benin emissaries voyaging between capitals and courts of Benin and Portugal. That's an important point. That's a very important point. Now, we don't just have the Portuguese going to Benin. We actually have people from the Benin Empire going to Portugal. So, you know, these people are spread, you know, people from Africa coming to Europe. That's sort of unprecedented, isn't it? These great officials coming from the Benin Empire going to Europe. It's not just the Portuguese going to Africa. This is the other way around as well. So what we do see is that you know, when I originally started doing the research on this, it was sort of getting into the nuts and bolts. And one thing that was going to be in this other article was going to be about slavery. So what I'm going to do is give you a bit more information, then we're going to look at all the images, and then we're going to call it a day. That's the best way of doing it. So obviously by the 1800s, the balance of power had changed. The Benin Empire was starting to crumble. There were changes, infighting, scramble for Africa, big countries interested. A further fundamental context that needs to be recognized for fully understanding this period of West Africa is the transatlantic slave trade. Said I was going to touch upon this briefly. This vast traffic in humans supplied labor to the colonies and plantations in the Americas, including those of Britain. While by the late 1800s, this trade had been largely abolished, its increasing scale and barbarity in the preceding centuries had led to a massive impact on West African societies. So probably, I don't really know the stats. I don't really know when the Benin Empire stopped actively involved in the slave trade. Maybe that was in the 1700s. But it's a very different slave trade. It's very barbaric by the time we get into the 1800s. Slavery is always going to be barbaric. Taking people into slavery is terrible. Now, we've already mentioned about the reason for going into the city. I want to give you a little bit more information. This sort of trade delegation going into Benin, there was 230, and apparently they were all killed. The British overrun Benin City in February 1897. Benin suffered a bloody and devastating occupation. It was the end of the Benin world. It was the end of this great empire that existed since 1440. No exact figure can be given for the number of Benin's population who were killed in the conquest of the city. However, it is clear that there were many casualties during the sustained fighting. The occupation of Benin City saw widespread destruction and pillaging by British forces. Along with other monuments and palaces, the royal palace was burned and destroyed. Its shrines and associated compounds were looted by British forces, and thousands of objects of ceremonial and ritual value were taken to the UK as official spoils of war, and then they were sold and distributed to other museums around the world. That's where they made their money. This included a range of objects, including whole shrines, ceremonial brass heads of the great kings, and associated ivory tusks as well. They even took the ivory tusks away. So these brass plaques were ripped off the walls of the palaces. The palaces were burnt down. And this was a repeat. This was exactly the repeat of what the conquistadors did when they entered Cusco in the year 1531. They went to those great golden temples and they ripped the gold off the walls. And this is a repeat of that. History, a repeat of history. Spanish did it in 1531. The British are doing it in 1897. Following the occupation, the king was captured and sent into exile. So that was the end of the Benin world. Justified as legitimate military action against a barbarous kingdom, this brutal, violent colonial episode effectively marked the end of the independent kingdom of Benin. And then the British moved in there and said, now it's our world. So I've basically mentioned everything else that is here. And you know, the British since then have been constantly asked to return these artifacts, being that Nigeria was a colony and all the rest of it. It sounds bizarre that lots of their artifacts haven't been returned. Lots of their artifacts are continually being sold around the world, that were in museums that have closed down, and so on and so on. So the argument is, I see what Jim and Karen was saying earlier on. Not Jim and Karen, it was Chris saying that if you send this stuff back to Nigeria in 50 years time, none of it will be there, right? But then again, in Western museums, when Western museums close, we sell off the artifacts as well. So there's that point. So what I'd like to do finally is just look at these wonderful images that we've got. And what we've, again, that is an original. So that's a brass and that's a bronze. Obviously, and there are lots of replicas of these as well out there. These are wonderful leopard figures. They're beautiful. And that itself is actually a wooden object. And that was that was held, is hollow there. And that object itself, which was 17 centimeters in length by about 14 centimeters, actually held cola nuts when they were being presented to people as they would visit the court, the royal court of Benin City in Nigeria. And that represents a leopard as well. They're so proud of their leopards. I love this one. This wasn't cast last year. This was cast itself. This is brass. This was in the 1600s. So look at the skill there. Look at the proportions. Look at the tail. Look at the ears. Look at the whiskers. Look at the teeth. Look at the mouth. Look at the leg. That has absolutely wonderful proportions there. That's actually in the Ethnological Museum of Berlin. And strangely enough, it survived the Second World War. So I've one of the last slides actually shows these on display with glass cabinets. So these cast brass plaques, we've already seen that. And you can imagine, I don't know if we can imagine, but how that would have been portrayed in these great wooden halls. Just think 6,000 of these things in this great wooden hall. So they take everything. We've taken everything in 1897. And that's the archaeological proof. That's the archaeological proof. All the ivory there, all the objects. You know, there's one of that gives you a proportion of one of the little leopards there. I think that leopard there, hang on, isn't that leopard the one, isn't that leopard there?
Very similar, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's got a longer tail. I think that's got
And
a
one
longer
on
tail.
the other side as well.
There's another one there as well.
Yeah.
So we can get an idea that from this image, because the copper disease, so that's going to be bronze and that's going to be brass, and you can see all the tusks there. So again, horse and rider. Now we're not saying that this should be returned, so because this dates back to the 1600s. So this is part of the trade with the Portuguese and all the rest of it. And usually enough, this is actually in the museum in Switzerland. Now again, what I said earlier on about sharing artifacts, I hardly know anything about Switzerland. If I gave a lecture on it, I could see the Iceman and I could do a few other things for half an hour and that'd be it. But would it be great to have some Swiss artifacts out there and that exchange? So this is a horse and rider. This isn't an oboe. This is a horse and rider. It doesn't have the chains of office around his neck. And that actually looks like a donkey. It's a really interesting scene there. I really like that. And I just threw this in as well as sort of giving you an idea of, obviously by around 300 years BC, 2,300 years ago, on the eastern coast, you've got the iron workings, you've got the Iron Age, and then further on down you've got Great Zimbabwe and all the rest of it by around the 1200s. And very much what you're seeing there is the Great Kingdom of Axum in green. The Great Kingdom of Axum, the very influential Kingdom of Axum, which we did actually do a talk about quite some time ago. And again, 3 portrayals. So that one on the left is a king. Actually, I'm reminded that some of these figures are the queen mothers of the kings. So that might actually be a representation of the queen, one of the queen mothers on the left, one of the queen mothers of the oboe, the kings. So we've already seen that one, the ivory, and we've obviously got one of the plaques. Lots of the warriors, really proud warriors. Is that relating to a great victory over one of the local tribes? We don't know, but maybe if we could put this into some kind of chronology, we might be able to get that. And that's it. That's as it's displayed in a British museum. And I got to be honest with you, that looks pretty crap. Mind my French. It just looks. It just doesn't look like anything. It just doesn't look alive. It looks like a load of stuff in cabinets, right? And sometimes I think the Nigerians should be saying, right, if you're going to keep some of this stuff, right, please portray it properly. Please give it some more expanse. Please give it some more depth, because this is not what I want to be seeing in a modern museum. I'm really not. So this is actually I think one of the queens, one of the queen mothers, and then you've got one of the plaques. You can get an idea of scale. So these are sort of so high. If you look at me, they're not massive things. The plaque in behind as well, probably a bit bigger if you go by how this is portrayed in that scale. It's about a foot tall, but again, 6,000 of these must have been a lot of weight. And another one of the warriors, one of the great warriors of the world. You've got a bit of a dagger. Do you know what I would like to see, Keith? I would like to see one of these with a rifle. I really would.
Yeah, with a musket. Yeah.
Yeah, I really would, because that would. You could have almost put the chronology in, couldn't you? You could say this is from like the 1600s, and the one with the musket, the rifle, would be from the
1700s on.
Yeah, I'd love that chronology. And I'm getting enthusiastic about this, but what I'm not enthusiastic about this is whatever museum this has been placed in, they've put two sort of semi-rusty screws and they've mounted it on the wall. That's not where this stuff should be. It's really not. And again, that can go straight back. And actually, strangely enough, that's my last image. So what I'm going to say now is I'm going to call that a day, because that's a nice end. I've been very critical, and I've been very controversial today, and I'm not regretting anything I've said. And hopefully everything's been in context. I'm not somebody. I'm somebody who always sides with native peoples, as you can probably make out from now. But okay, so what we'll do, we'll have a first question from Goff. Goff, is that satisfied you?
No questions. That's really good. The images were wonderful, and I love it when you visit different parts of the world. That's great. Thank you.
It's been a delight. And next week, Siberia again. I've never been to Siberia. I don't think any of you have. That's next week. So look forward to that. So Jane had to go earlier on, and Chris had to leave earlier on. Oh my God, they've had to go. Never mind. Keith.
No questions really. I would mention that most modern museums do have reciprocal arrangements with other museums around the world, so that when they're holding an exhibition, museums will lend articles that they have in their collections to each other. So the British Museum lends things to France, France lends things to us, etc. So this goes on all the time anyway. So once Nigeria gets its museums up and going, there's no reason why they can't borrow our Sutton Hoe exhibition.
And I think they bloody well should. I really do. So at least, again, Nigerians not ever able to see our history, and we not be able to see them. It sounds great. Chris.
No questions. No, it's very good. Enjoyed it thoroughly.
Yeah, my thanks for that. Ellen, if you stay behind at the end, I tell you what, Ellen, I'll give you a phone call in
Ellen in detention then.
No, Ellen's not in detention. No, Ellen, I'll give you a phone call in about 20 minutes. Okay, landline or mobile.
Landline.
Okay, I'll do that. Ellen.
Right.
And you mentioned her name 5 times.
Any questions from Pam? No. Go on, Pam. You got 30 seconds. Go.
No, finished. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Pam. And anyone who's joining Jessica tonight, just a reminder about that. And finally, Karen and Jim, keep it brief.
No, that's very fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, and nothing from Karen except a laugh. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I want one of the leopard bronzes. I thought they were lovely.
I bet you would.
And
just
the
put-
mask as well. The ivory mask would look nice on my
Yeah.
wall of masks.
That was
I
beautiful.
quite
wasn't it?
fancy that.
I'm definitely sure it would. I've got my wonderful Michelle on the phone waiting now, so I'm gonna ask. Is there Michelle? I'll be there now. Anything you want to say, Jessica?
No, I felt like it was good. You done well considering you're not yourself, but it was much better than when you first started because I feel like you exhausted yourself, but you're getting back into it. You're more energetic. Oh,
That's what I need to do. That's what I need to do. That's what I need to do. So, well, we're going to be doing Siberia next week, so that's good. Not Serbia, Siberia. If there's no other questions, right? Jessica, if you can hang on there. If there's no other question, we'll have more articles of the week, right?
One thing you'll have to do though is to explain to Jessica what dogging is, because she's too young to know.
I'm not going to explain what it is. Right, on that note, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. Gov, it's been a pleasure as usual. Chris, it's been a pleasure. Keith, Karen, Jim, Ellen, Pam, and Jess. See you all soon.
bye.
Cheerio, bye, Daddy. Bye, Daddy.
Take care, children.
Bye,
Bye.
Daddy.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Are you there, Michelle? Right, I'm just wanting to think. Jess, do you want to stay there a minute?
Yeah.
I'll just have a quick. You have a quick chat with Chris, and I'll end that recording now, and I'll just have a quick chat with Michelle. I'll be back now.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay.
Tell Michelle I said hi.
Yeah, I will. I'll do that now.